You gonna go? Do you want to introduce it or just?
I'll grab mine.
I'll go. All right, let's get things started. It's 2:00. Is this thing going to be always? Was this the thing that was doing the clicking?
Yeah. It was messed up for the last guy.
It was. See, that's just going to be annoying for you guys more than anything else.
Yeah.
Let's just see if it. I'll try and stay still then. All right. Good afternoon. I'm going to stay really still. My name is Michael Howard. I'm here to talk about. I can't even believe I am doing this. I'll be honest with you. A history of the SDL. I mean, seriously? It seems like yesterday we started this stuff. It is really, really freaky. It's almost like going back to like a high school reunion or something. I mean, it's kind of really, really weird. Anyway, let me get stuck into this. So first of all, who am I? For those of you who don't know me, or those I haven't met yet, Michael Howard. There's my email address. Actually, can we dim the lights a little bit? It's just easier to see the. There's quite a bit of material moving on. Feel free to email me if you have any questions at all or comments or whatever. So, well, that's subtle, isn't it? I guess we're done. So I've been at Microsoft for, actually I can't even believe this, I've been at Microsoft now for 19 years. I've always been involved in security. For the longest time it was always things like SIDs and privileges and ACLs and crypto and permissions and user tokens and desktop tokens and all that sort of crud. And then a group of us decided to focus on security as in threats. And that's really how we evolved what is the current group. I've been involved with the Microsoft SDL, the security development lifecycle, since day one. Me and Steve Lipner, my old boss, we kind of kicked things off with the SDL. And the team, which was originally 2 people, has now grown to probably north of 130 people inside of Microsoft. Along the way, I've written a couple of books. Probably most well known is Running Secure Code, which, by the way, is still selling very well. It just blows me away. I don't tell my wife that, though, because she'll just want to spend the proceeds. So anyway, you should be just aware of where sort of the SDL fits at Microsoft. Some of these things you're probably well aware of. Every second Tuesday, you're very well aware of the MSRC, the Microsoft Security Response Center. We have the Malware Protection Center as well. Over on the other side of the company is the Security Engineering Group, which is part of the Trustworthy Computing Group. And we have things like security science, I'll talk about that in a minute, as well as the SDL, the team that looks after the processes at Microsoft, security and privacy engineering processes at Microsoft. So the SDL, the goals of the SDL, I'm sure many of you have sort of read something on the SDL, or at least heard it, or read some of the propaganda. But basically the goals of the SDL are twofold. Everything drives these two. I'm a huge believer in having an overarching vision for what you want to do. Otherwise you're going to stumble through life and do things that are probably not very beneficial. So the goals of the SDL are twofold, and these goals have been that way since day one. And they are reduce the number of vulnerabilities in the code and reduce the severity of the ones that you miss, because you're never going to get everything. As long as attackers are drawing breath, you will never get everything, because it's an industry that's constantly evolving. So everything drives that. Like when anyone wants to put something in the SDL, we ask 2 questions. Will it remove bugs, or will it add defenses, or reduce the severity of a bulletin? If the answer is no, it's just cool, it's not going in the SDL. It's really that simple. In fact, one thing I want to point out about the SDL is that we will remove things from the SDL if they're no longer proving to be beneficial. So the key principles, I'm a big believer in this, prescriptive yet practical. Again, this really boils down to if it's not practical, if it doesn't really work, then just don't bother. If it's not practical, in other words, if you're just going to bitch and moan about something being bad coding practice but not have a good solution, it's not going in the SDL. You can't just tell people that that's just really, really bad. You've got to say that's really, really bad and here's a great solution to fix it. Here's the way you should fix it, and here's the tools that you can run to verify that you've fixed it. Or even better, you don't have the problem in the first place. Right? So the goal of the SDL, that's something I want to point out, is a big goal of the SDL isn't just finding and fixing bugs, it's preventing them in the first place. Right? That's engineering. You know, finding 1,000 bugs and saying, hey, look, we found and fixed 1,000 bugs, there's nothing to be proud of with that, in my opinion. Yeah, I've heard some of our competitors say that. You know, in the last 10 years, we found and fixed 1,000 security vulnerabilities. Hoorah! It's like, nah, nothing to be proud of, guys. In fact, one of the biggest indicators that we found for the number of security bugs post-ship is the number of bugs you find pre-ship. If you find a bucket load of bugs in some code, and you feel proud you found a bucket load of bugs, guess what? You've got a bucket load of bugs you've missed. If you find, you actually go through a whole bunch of code and you find very, very few bugs, the initial response from some people will be, oh my God, we haven't found many bugs. You know, the code is crap, or our testers are crap. But when you actually ship, you probably have better quality code. One of the biggest indicators that we've found is the number of bugs you find pre-ship is a very good indicator of how many bugs you will find post-ship. So the SDL covers the whole of the Microsoft development lifecycle, everything from literally conception all the way through to death of the product. Essentially everything at Microsoft now is touched by the SDL. It's extremely rare to have a product that is not touched by the SDL. All right, let me go through another group that you may not have heard of very much, is the security science group at Microsoft. We hire a lot of researchers, like a good example is Matt Miller. We hired him a couple of years back. He has been very, very instrumental in a lot of the Windows defenses that that you saw coming in Windows 7 and some that are coming out in Windows 8. He's been very, very involved with a lot of those defenses. And basically, the job of the science team is pretty straightforward. It's to analyze current threats that we know, try to predict future threats that we don't know about yet, and come up with ways of mitigating those threats. So a priori, in other words, adding them to the OS, or adding them to Visual Studio, or adding some new libraries, or deprecating old functionality. It's pretty much an open field in terms of what we do in the security science landscape. So we go through SDL, a history. Again, it seems pretty freaky doing this actually, because it only seems like yesterday that we were doing this stuff. Microsoft has always been involved in security. We've been very, very busy since the earliest days of Windows NT with common criteria evaluations. So there's always been sort of a security focus. So a lot of this adoption of security in product groups prior to SDL though was very, very uneven. Some groups sort of got religion a lot earlier than other groups. I'll be frank, I think a lot of people would back me up on this one. I think most software vendors, and we still see this today, only start to really focus a lot on pure software security when their customers start complaining. Customers ain't complaining, just keep spoon feeding the customers, right? That's all it is. Until the customers start complaining and saying, we need you to improve your game, they're not going to improve their game. It's pretty rare. I've seen some companies do it, where they've done it without customers complaining, but it's pretty rare, unfortunately. So back in the early days, it was pretty spotty. Some product groups did better than others, but on the whole, it was pretty ragged. Remember I said before that I sort of always worked in software security, but it was always like privileges and SIDs and ACLs and tokens and firewalls and crypto and all that sort of stuff. Well, that was sort of around the Windows 2000 timeframe. Just before Windows 2000 shipped, this is when our group started to grow. And so some of the stuff that we'd learned, some of it found its way into Windows 2000. But again, it was really uneven. And we know what Windows 2000 was like, right, when it comes to security, from a security standpoint. Now, what the crazy thing was, that Windows 2000 was chock full of security features. It had certificate server, it had Active Directory, it had group policy up the wazoo, right? It had it had IPsec. It had all these security technologies Therefore, it was secure. But it had many, many security vulnerabilities. And so, it's the old adage, right? Just bolting on security features is not going to make your product secure from attack. And so this is why our group has started focusing on security as in threats, not security as in security features. We'd also invented this thing called Stride at this point. There was a paper that was written internally called The Threats to Our Products. And this paper was like inside Microsoft, it was like a seminal paper. And it was really just looking at what are the threats to the products? What does it mean to have a product under threat, under risk of attack? And then we started sort of codifying the methods of attack. And it was very, very rough. But that's why we invented this thing called Stride. So what the attacker wants to do. Spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege. Think of CIA, a little bit more fine-grained, and look at it from an attacker's perspective as opposed to a defender's perspective. That's essentially what Stride was. The joke, by the way, is that the reason we added repudiation in there is that otherwise it would be diets, which doesn't quite, the same thing. We also invented this thing called the universal bug bar. This, I think, was one of the most important things we ever did, which was coming up with the concept of critical, important, moderate, and low severity vulnerabilities, because not all bugs are alike. A buffer overrun, people hear the word buffer overrun, and they're scared. But the thing is, if you can't get to that code at all, I was looking at some code that I wrote when I was 20 years old, and it's about 30,000 lines of C. And it's completely secure. Completely secure. Is the code great quality C code? It's not bad, but it has buffer overruns in it. It does. But the crazy thing is it's completely secure because it's not networked. It doesn't run in elevated privileges. It doesn't do anything bunky at all. It's a dumb game. Actually, it's a pretty cool game, actually. But it's funny because it's completely secure because it's absolutely isolated. The worst you can do is attack yourself, which is hardly exciting. So this bug bar, it was our first look at how do we define the severity of a security vulnerability. We also started doing root cause analysis. I am a massive believer in root cause analysis, and we have continued to do this to this day. Why did we make that mistake? What happened? And so what we do is, in fact, I spent, beginning of this year, I spent almost 4 months going over the last 3 years of MSRC bulletins, looking at every MSRC bulletin, getting every CVE out of each bulletin, and assigning CWEs to each of the CVEs, and do like a little annotation to work out what the issue. I knew Joe would be happy. But just find but there's a reason for doing that. So I'm sort of getting ahead of myself, but I'll do it anyway. What I also did was look at all the SDL requirements and assign CWEs to those. In other words, what kinds of CWEs is that requirement meant to mitigate? And then go look at all the MSRC bulletins and say, well, what CWEs are we still having? Is there a mismatch? And this is a very, very important thing, I think, to find out what gaps we have in the SDL. Yeah, Joe.
In case you've got people in the audience who don't have a clue what CWEs are, I'll talk about the next presentation.
Okay. So which room are you going to be in? The big room. So Joe Jassenbach can be the big room, CV, CWE. Common vulnerability enumeration, common vulnerability and exposures, and common weakness enumeration. So CVE is like a unique key that's given for every vulnerability, and CWE is a weakness. Like for example, memory corruption. Underneath that, there may be classic buffer overrun or integer arithmetic kind of issues. There's a way of enumerating weaknesses. But I'm a huge believer in doing root cause analysis. If you're not doing root cause analysis of bugs that you are finding either within your own organizations or within your customers, they should be doing it. It's not rocket science, and frankly, if you don't understand the bugs that you are creating, you will never get rid of them over time. You just won't, because you don't know what the problems are. couple of years back, Hugh Thompson and I presented at RSA on this exact subject. I don't know how many of you know Hugh. He's from Bermuda. So he's pretty like laid back man. You know, he's like really sort of pretty laid back. And he's like, love your bugs. It's a really bad Hugh Thompson impression, I'm sorry. But basically he's like, love your bugs. He's like, oh, I won't quite go that far, but understand the mistakes that you're making. We also bought a company at this point called Intrinsa. And they had a tool called Prefix, which was a inter-procedural static analysis tool for C and C++. And it was the first real static analysis, like powerful static analysis that we ever used at Microsoft. And we found bug after bug after bug, because frankly back then, it was all low-hanging fruit. It really was low-hanging fruit. So we also found, you know, as you probably are very well aware, you know, malware, especially in the form of worms, was pretty much rampant. You know, we had Co-Red and Nimba, for example, all in 2001. And part of this led to the Trustworthy Computing Memo from Bill Gates. I will go through this whole series of events in a bit more detail shortly. But essentially what it was Gates saying, okay, we're going to take the security and privacy stuff, and by that I don't mean features, it's going to be taken very, very seriously. Now, Bill's memos are very, very rare. So for him to put this out was a big deal. It basically gave our group almost carte blanche to do whatever the heck we wanted, within reason. And the execs on down all bought into this. At the end of 2001, we had this thing called the .NET Security Push. It was actually called the .NET Security Stand Down. I don't know why it was called that, but it was really fascinating because here we had this thing called .NET. It had been built from the ground up with security in mind. It had to, right? It had the sandboxing idea and verification of code before it was executed, so on and so forth. So it was built for security in mind. But we had around October 2001, we had found some security bugs in the .NET framework. So that sucks, because here we have this thing that's built with security brand spanking new, right? Version 1 product, brand spanking new. You can't even blame legacy, right? Because there was no such thing back then. The .NET framework we didn't care. There was no legacy. We found these security bugs. Like, oh crap, what do we do? Because one of our biggest indicators of bugs going forward is the bugs you're currently finding. So I thought, well, we can't ship this way. We were shipping in February the next year, 2002. So what we decided to do, was a really, really gutsy move, is the team said, we'll put everyone back through security training, everyone in the .NET Framework team, and Michael and his team will do all the education for us. Then what we'll do is all the developers, you need to go looking for these kinds of bugs. Program managers and architects, you need to go go back over your threat models again and find there's anything you've missed. Testers, you need to go doing these sorts of things. And we'll monitor the incoming bug rate. And we're done when the bug rate basically flatlines, which is fascinating because we're shipping in February. The whole thing was going to start at the end of November and go as long as it had to go until the incoming bug rate flatlined. Problem is we had no idea when that was going to be. We had the Moscone Center booked for shipping the .NET Framework in February. So well, this is kind of gutsy, isn't it? We also know that making changes, you all know the story, right? You're always very leery of making changes this late in the game. It's the old adage, you know, you make a change to fix a bug, you can introduce more bugs. You know, you open the window to let a fly out, and 2 flies fly in. It's the old adage, right? It's when we explain to people about introducing regressions by fixing bugs, they don't get it. Until you explain to them, open the window to let a fly out, and 2 flies come back in again. So that was like end of November, early December. We found about half a dozen bugs that all got fixed. But one thing that we did do, which is probably the biggest, gutsiest move we've ever done, certainly back then. How many of you used ASP.NET before version 1, like the beta of it. Okay, you're lucky. Because back then, in the beta, ASP.NET, I'm not kidding here, ran in system context. We saw this, we're like, you ain't shipping this way. So, well, we are, because it's like, it's December, and we're shipping in February, and we've got the Moscone Center booked, and it's not a trivial change, and we're going to run all the tests, every single test again. We know all the debugging scenarios will break. We know that our third-party vendors who build on top of this and expect their debugging scenarios to work will all break. We don't care. No security. We used to, we break stuff all the time. It's like water for ducks back. We don't care about that crap. So, and they said, look, how many users will use ASP? Like, how many people will actually touch ASP.NET applications? Billions, right? Billions of users, or millions of users, billions of page views, billions of hits. How many people will debug, like, be hardcore debugging ASP.NET applications? 5 people, right? And 4 of them are in Redmond. Versus billions and billions and billions of people, right? Billions of page views versus 5 people. I'm willing to break the 5 people to protect the billions and billions and billions of page views. They got that. So we switched it out from running in system context to running in network service. It's a much, much lower privileged account. If you compromise it, you're not just God on the box all of a sudden. You're not. You don't work at it to get to a privileged account. We made that change before version 1 shipped. And the crazy thing was, it's the best decision we ever made. We probably would have been forced to make the decision anyway after version 1 shipped, after it had been deployed on millions of websites who would then have had millions of regressions because all this stuff didn't work. It was absolutely the right decision to make. Absolutely the right decision to make. We also added a new managed code attribute called allow partially trusted callers attribute, which basically took a bunch of code and said, I will allow essentially untrusted code to call me. And by default, we would not allow untrusted code to call certain managed code assemblies. So we reduced the attack surface of the .NET framework and ASP.NET substantially. There were design changes, which is exactly not the thing you want to do right before you ship, especially when you've got the Moscone Center booked. So something else actually happened at this point. I forgot to talk about it. So David LeBlanc and I have been working on writing secure code. And December 8th, 2001, the first edition started coming out. Well, the first copy started coming out, and I got my hands on a couple of copies. On December the 12th, I had a meeting with Gates. It was a one-on-one meeting for 4 hours to go through security bugs. Because he wanted to understand more about the nature of security bugs. I had like 45 slides. We covered 5. 5 slides in 4 hours. Because all he had was question after question after question after question. That's what he's like, question after question. That's all it is, just question after question. By the way, rule number 1, if you're talking to Gates, know your stuff. Otherwise, he'll tear you apart. So it was a great meeting. I had my first copy of Writing Secure Code, and I gave him a copy of Writing Secure Code. And then on the Monday, that was on Friday, on the Monday, he emailed me and said, I read the book over the weekend, absolutely loved the book, which was the lead-in when we did the second edition to get Gates to put the quote on the front of the book. By the way, and the last time he put a quote on a book was in Inside OS 2 by Gordon Letwin, which I have a copy of, signed by Gordon Letwin. And his comment to me from Gordon Letwin is, thank you for saving us from ourselves. That's the comment from Letwin. Anyway, God, where the hell am I? All right, so that was end of December 2001. The Trustworthy Computer Memo came out January 2002. Then we had the Windows security push, February 2002. We're basically going to model it on the .NET Framework push because it was so successful. But again, it was completely open-ended. We had no clue when we were going to be done. We were going to be done when we flatlined on bugs. That's it. So we had 3 tracks of education for everyone in the Windows division. We had 3 tracks: developer training, design, architecture, program management training, and test training. I was in charge of the developers. I had all the developers in Windows. My colleague Jason Garms had all the PMs and designers, and Chris Walker had test. And we were like just feed everyone through. The training was mandatory for everybody, just to get everyone up to a baseline level of expertise. It became known as the Windows Security Push. It says here that the size of the Windows code base was roughly 10 times that of the CLR. Frankly, the code size didn't matter that much. What mattered was most of the code was old. Right? We had legacy issues to worry about. If I had my way, I would shoot backward compatibility in the head in a heartbeat. I really would. But on planet Earth, you can't do that. You just can't, because no one will use your products. But I would love to produce a version of any product that was, totally secure. But people would want to load their Word documents and their PowerPoint documents and play their MP3s and play their WMVs and what have you, I would love to kill all that backward compatibility. But you just can't, and that's the problem we faced in Windows. This is also we started driving our first threat modeling. It was really kind of interesting. For the threat modeling tool, I'll be frank, I wrote as an experiment in writing client-side JavaScript. It sucked. That's why in the early days people hated threat modeling at Microsoft. It was all my fault. The tool was crap, absolutely ridiculously impossible to use. It was my first foray into using JavaScript on the client. Yeah, won't be doing that again. There was very much a vote of no confidence in my JavaScript skills back then, which is probably pretty good because I don't know about you guys, but I don't even understand JavaScript as it stands today anyway. This is where we also started force-feeding people prefix, giving people bug reports. Okay, you got all these bugs in your code. Go look at them, triage them, and fix them. And here's how to fix it. We also started running desktop analysis pretty fast. That's where we introduced that, which is basically essentially an intra-procedural static analysis as opposed to inter-procedural, which is what prefix is. You can't run prefix on the desktop. It's just too big, way too big, and it's just unwieldy. But we do run prefix centrally, as opposed to on everyone's desktop. We also added this thing called a security audit. We changed its name to the final security review because bankers didn't like us using the word audit. I mean, for obvious reasons. It carries certain implications. But the job of the FSR, or the security audit, back then, wasn't to make sure that you were secure, it was to make sure that you were complying with the SDL. That's it. That's all it's there for. We make sure you've done all the right things, then give you a tick at the end. In a perfect world, we would find nothing during the FSR. But on planet Earth, there's always something, especially for the bigger products. One thing that we found, however, is that having a security push, while beneficial, is not scalable. It's just not. You can't write stuff right before you ship. Let's go look for some security bugs and fix them. You just can't do that. It really does not work. So this is when we started talking to the leadership team about changing the process, about changing the way we build software at Microsoft. And we really had 3 options. Option number 1 was do nothing and hope the problem goes away. Yeah, whatever. The second one was totally rip out our current development practices and replace it with something brand new, which, by the way, no one knew what that brand new was going to be. That's not going to happen, right? I mean, at the end of the day, Microsoft, believe it or not, can actually ship software. That's what we do. Right? Everything's about shipping software. That's it. We actually have a process that actually works. It's not always on time, but we do get software out the door. There's no way we could jeopardize that. So we went for this hybrid approach, which is taking our existing processes and augmenting it with security requirements and privacy requirements. Today there are 129 such requirements. It's in that ballpark. It changes from version to version. But it's over 100, definitely over 100 requirements. We also started talking now a lot, we sort of started really codifying attack surface analysis, what it meant to reduce attack surface, how much code and functionality was exposed to untrusted users. And so we really started building tools around that and measuring it as well. So around 2004 is where we really started codifying the SDL. It sort of now finally had its name, the Security Development Lifecycle. It was based a lot on what we'd learned during the .NET and Windows security pushes. A lot of that was also gleaned from SQL Server Team, Exchange, Office. They all had mini pushes as well. So we sort of learned like what worked. Like when these pushes happened, which ones found the most bugs? Which ones didn't provide a ton of friction and still found bugs? Because last thing I want to do, I'll be honest with you, is add something that is so, it totally impinges on shipping software. Software in the lab is of no use to anybody. And so we focus a lot on being as low friction as possible. You may be thinking to yourself, how the heck can you be low friction with over 120 requirements? Most of them are low friction. They are. We can add tools. We can tool up on a lot of this stuff. We can make it really, really streamlined. We also started to make sure people had their threat models in place, make sure they had the static analysis done. We started documenting what an FSR actually meant, the things that we're going to look at. We also started to require the use of native C and C++ defenses, memory corruption defenses, stack-based buffer overrun detection, no execute, and safe exception handling. You've got to realize back then we had no ASLR, address-based layout randomization. That had to wait until Windows Vista. So we required these from day one. Now, remember I said before about making it as low friction as possible? We worked really, really closely with the developer division to have these enabled by default in the compiler and linker. Right, so today, if you go cl space foo.cpp, you get all these on by default. There's no need to add a linker flag or a compiler flag. You get them by default. That's as low friction as you can get. Nothing changed, except we added the defenses by default. To me, like the biggest and two most important words are by default. Just make it the default. And you know what? If you have a corner case that doesn't work, turn it off, say GS, then get an exception through the SDL process. We have an exception process. There are some components that don't work correctly with GS. They're extremely rare. But there's an exception process that people can go through. They can't just turn it off. They have to turn it off. We'll detect when they turned it off, by the way. We know they turned it off. But they go through the exception process. The bug bar, I sort of talked about this before. We now added this so that basically if you were, at any point, if you have a bug and is deemed critical or important, you have to fix it. It doesn't matter where you are in the development lifecycle. You have to fix it. Now the cool thing is people will say, you know, they all say, oh, I don't think that's exploitable. The bug bar doesn't bring really into it exploitability. It's accessibility. Not exploitability, it's accessibility. I don't know about you, I'm not going to start playing chicken with a memory corruption bug that's externally accessible. I'm not. And so the bug bar codifies a lot of that and gets rid of a lot of the arguments because it's very, very concrete. It's very, very well defined. We know exactly what a critical bug is. We also started introducing fuzzing here. In the early days, it was just file and RPC endpoints. Anyone want to know or guess why RPC endpoints? Give you a clue. It starts with B and rhymes with faster. Okay, starts with BL and rhymes with faster. The blaster worm, right? That's why we started fuzzing RPC endpoints. That's why in Windows XP Service Pack 2, the RPC runtime was broken up into two chunks. How many of you noticed that? Pre-Windows XP Service Pack 2, the RPC runtime was one service that ran in system context. It turned out the code for actually doing RPC stuff didn't need to run in system context. The code for starting remote decom objects had to run in system context, but it was very, very rarely called. So in Windows XP Service Pack 2, we broke it up into two services. The very, very high profile, extremely exposed RPC runtime runs in much lower privilege versus the one for starting decom objects is harder to get to. The code is much, much smaller, and it runs in system context. Great example of separating out service into discrete chunks. It took like 6 months to do that work, by the way. It was a lot of work. But that's why we did RPC fuzzing back then. This is where we started introducing our cryptographic standards as well. No MD4, no MD5, no SHA-1. Even back then, 2005, we said no SHA-1. No DES, no triple DES, no RC4. Even if you use a billion bit key RC4, it is still banned. No electronic codebook. Of course, CBC's now got some interesting little weaknesses as well. So we're going back to the SDL crypto requirements about how you use cipher block chaining as well. We also started introducing our very first runtime tools, like @verifier, FXCOP, those kinds of tools for doing runtime analysis of applications. We started fuzzing ActiveX controls in SDL 3 and 3.1. This is where we introduced ban.h. Basically, there's now about 120 functions that were just banned in the CEC runtime library, including memcopy. Memcopy is banned for new code. So to put this in perspective, in Windows Vista, we went through the whole of Windows Vista and removed all strcpy, strcat, strncopy, strncat, sprintf. There were no get s's, by the way. And there's about 1/3 calls. They're all gone and replaced with safer versions. We also, at this point, because we have such a healthy relationship with the developer division, we asked the developer division in their C compiler to add, during a compilation, if they know the buffer size at runtime, they know the buffer size at compile time, and there's a call to a banned API, like strcpy, automatically migrate the strcpy to a safer call during compilation, and don't emit a warning that the function is deprecated. Some people don't like that because we're changing the code under the covers, but frankly, we don't care. If you don't like that, you can turn it off. But frankly, we don't care. And every argument that people have has turned out to be, oh, you're going to break my code. No, we're not. Show me one example. So I'll be honest with you, people say, I'm not going to go and wholesale change all my strcopies and strcats to these safer versions because I'm going to get performance problems and regressions. How many regressions do you think we found after replacing 1/3 calls in Windows Vista? How many regressions did we find? One. And it was code that actually relied on the fact that strcpy may not null terminate the buffer. Seriously? It's like, can you put a comment in the code to that effect, please? Because it's so funny, because as we tuned our tools, this code would like light up all the time. Buffer may not be null terminated. Yeah, we know. And so it's actually one special piece of code, but it's one. There's been no performance problems. I'll never forget. This is in Windows 2000. The Active Directory team, or part of the Active Directory team. Now, we can't replace the banned APIs with these other APIs. Like, wow, our performance is going to suck. It's like, seriously? You guys think it's doing very, very heavy network traffic, massive amounts of disk I/O, massive amounts of public key crypto, massive amounts of symmetric crypto, and you're worried about 2 clock cycles? Really? So we end up changing this code, no problems. So cross-site scripting is something we started addressing in SDL 3.2, server SQL injection, XML parsing. We found, how many of you are aware of those bugs back then with self-referencing DTDs? So basically you have an XML parser going to an infinite loop because the DTD will reference itself. It affected everybody, absolutely everybody. And so now what we have at Microsoft is a minimum XML runtime. If you're writing managed code or native C and C++, there's a native, a minimum version number. And we detect that with tools. So when we get your final package, we can run these tools, and we can check the XML parser that you're using. It has to be above a certain version number. We also released our first documentation on the SDL publicly. In Windows Vista 2007-2008, so we added ASLR to Windows Vista, and we made that a requirement in SDL. We also added this thing called SAL, the standard annotation language, as a recommendation. I'm not going to go through SAL. If you want to know about it, come on and see them at the end. But it's basically a way of describing the interface contract for a function. So I'll give you a quick example. Let's say you've got a function that takes two arguments, a buffer and a size. You know those two values are tied at the hip, right? The buffer is that big. Well, the compiler has no clue. All it sees is a pointer and a 32-bit unsigned integer. Well, with SAL, you can actually say that buffer is that big, or no more than that big. So it helps the tools find more bugs, because we know the interface contract. There's a lot more to SAL than just that, though. 2008, 2009, SDL5, we now required safe integer arithmetic. We had code written by David LeBlanc, primarily by David for C++, safe integer arithmetic. We'd also at this point added a new option, a new change to the compiler, where we will detect at runtime automatically integer overflows when calling operator new. So if you get an integer overflow when you call new in C++, and the implicit multiplication overflows, will kill your process. The reliability guys hate us. We don't care. We just found a security bug in your code with a nice clean stack trace to the bug. We don't care at that point. We also, probably one of the biggest things we did here was third-party licensing requirements, going back to our big vendors and saying, you've got to meet this minimum bar. Otherwise, you're not in the box, the Windows box, for example. 2009 is when we first released our public release of some of our tools. The SDL threat modeling tool, I'll tell you right now, is the tool we use internally. The only change is what we report the bugs to. So the version that we have internally reports to our back-end bug reporting infrastructure called Product Studio, which is of no use to any of you. That's the only difference. The version that's publicly available either reports to an XML file or to Team Foundation server. We also released Visual Studio templates. Bin scope, which is a binary analyzer, so we can make sure that you're actually complying with SDL requirements like GS, ASLR, safe exception handling, compiler version number, that kind of stuff. And we also released a very simple file fuzzer as well. Which, by the way, a very, very large ISV who will remain nameless ran Minifuzz and found 10 discrete bugs in 1 week in their code. All security bugs, all remotely exploitable by running Minifuzz. And it's not a clever fuzzer, I'll tell you right now. It's as dumb as a bucket of rocks. One that I've been hugely involved with since day one is sample code requirements. At Microsoft now, all sample code is subject to the SDL. Why? Samples are not samples, they're templates. People copy, paste, and if the stuff's crap, guess what? The crap perpetuates. You know? We had a lot of kicking and screaming on that one. We did, we had a lot of kicking and screaming. Samples are supposed to show how you get something done. It's like, yes, securely. You know? We also made SAL a requirement rather than a recommendation. I should point out there's difference. Requirements are things that you must do. We can stop you from shipping if you do not adhere to these requirements. Recommendations are things that you should probably think about, especially if you're IE. They're what we call them negotiated commitments. In other words, you're IE, you're very exposed, these other 5 things really kind of affect you, and because you're IE, you should really do them. And recommendations are usually stuff that's a little bit harder to do, maybe more friction, or something absolutely brand new. So I'm not going through the timeline. These slides will be available. But as you can see, the SDL has evolved many, many times. And in fact, we're now up to SDL 5.2 internally. I'll go real quickly through security science and then just wrap things up. This is a discrete team that focuses literally on the future. Is where are attacks going? What can we put in the OS? What can we put in the education? What can we put in the tooling? What can we put in Visual Studio to mitigate these threats moving forward? I can't say too much about this, but I would say the biggest delta will be in the Windows 8 Visual Studio toolset. The biggest security delta to date. It's going to be massive. Lots of good quality changes, lots of good changes there. I can't talk about them, obviously, but we always try to do that. So we saw a massive change when we went to Windows Vista and the tool set on top of it. There was an incremental change to Windows 7, so we'll see things moving forward. Same with Office, right? Office, we keep raising the bar slowly. I would argue that the real point of the security science team is mitigating 0 days. Is really what it kind of boils down to. So one thing the reason why you can't even read these slides, but basically what it shows is a progression from Windows XP to Windows 7 and how we've opted in for the different defenses over time. As you see, it gets more and more green as we go over that way, as we opt into more and more of these defenses. Same with Windows Server. Again, you can't read this, so look at the slides later. One thing I want to urge you guys, if you guys are building on Windows, you need to opt in for these defenses. Right? A lot of them are not enabled by default for your app, unless you compile with our current tools. And for some reason, in some legacy cases, people don't do it anyway. So the big two by far are DEP and X and address-based layout randomization. You've got to opt in for both of them. You've got to do them both together. We've been working with a lot of big ISVs over the last 4 or 5 years to get them all to opt into this. And the big one is if you're running anything that runs inside of the browser, you've got to opt in as well. Otherwise, you become a springboard for attacks. That's why we're all very happy when Java 7 came out. Because finally, Oracle had added ASLR and DEP support, which now prevents the JVM from being the #1 springboard out of all the protections that are in IE. That's now gone. So ASLR, as of about 6 months ago, only 34% of the world was fully enabled, leaving about 20% not enabled at all. By sector, it's interesting, all the browser clients now have it enabled. For DEP, it's a bit better. Medicaid's been out for much longer. 71% is enabled by default. And by sector, it's interesting again, all browsers now enable it by default. But if you look at it by different sort of vertical, it is not as a prettier picture. So the real call to action here is that, here's what I would do. If you're building any code at all that compiles down to an exe on Windows or a DLL, get hold of a copy of BinScope, run BinScope on your binaries, and if ASLR and DEP are not enabled by default on any of your binaries, you need to fix that. So I want to stress this again, we need to improve the quality of the ecosystem, the security of the ecosystem. We're going to do that by everybody being involved. We've hardened the OS, we've given lots of tooling to make this a lot easier for you. But it's now up to everybody to start opting in for this stuff. So the SDL is interesting. The SDL has been around now for, I can't believe that. Well, security sort of changes at Microsoft have now been in place for almost 10 years, which really just blows me away because I remember those halcyon days. But it's interesting to see that it's become an accepted industry leader. Even cynics like Gartner have been saying that SDL is industry leading. It's not perfect by any stretch, and we evolve this thing every year, every single year. There's no SDL 5.2 stuff up there. One of the biggest things we've done is collapse a lot of the requirements to single requirements that can be measured by one tool, as opposed to like 7 requirements that are all measured by the same tool to make things easier for people. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me. It's mikehowe@microsoft.com. Or his website, microsoft.com/SDL. By the way, do you know how hard it is to get like part of the microsoft.com domain to give you like part of their URI space? It's pretty hard, but we got it. So with that, I'm done. We're out of time, right? I'm milling around. If you have any questions, feel free to yell at me. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.